Hi guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world that feels familiar. At first glance, snow on rooftops, distant bells, wood smoke curling lazily into the sky. But this isn't the Christmas you know. As you step forward, your breath blurs in the icy air, and you realize you're standing in a medieval village where the cold bites sharper, the shadows feel longer, and the day ahead is stitched with rituals that would puzzle and enchant you in equal measure. The frost crunches under your boots, and for a moment, as you look around at the crooked timber frames and sagging thatch, you have this sudden, sinking moment of recognition. You probably won't survive this, not unless you embrace the strange rhythm of this century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights. You draw your cloak or whatever counts as one closer to your body. The fabric is scratchy, not soft and fleece-lined the way you're used to, and the chill immediately creeps up your arms. This is medieval winter, after all, where warmth depends not on insulation ratings, but on layers of rough wool, luck, and stubbornness. You stand in the middle of a village barely awake, roofs dusted with snow, smoke rising from a few chimneys, frost gripping the edges of shuttered windows like nature's own iron bars. Even at this hour, you can hear the distant bleating of animals stirred early, and the hollow thud of someone splitting firewood. That's your first historical truth of the night. For most medieval people, Christmas wasn't a single day, but the center of a long, labor, heavy winter season, full of preparation, community expectation, and more than a little anxiety. The feast was precious, precisely because the cold months were so hard. Even now, your toes ache inside shoes that are little more than stiff leather wrapped around coarse cloth. As you trudge along the narrow lane, you notice how crooked everything looks. Not picturesque crooked, like a postcard, but crooked from centuries of shifting earth and imperfect hands. A rooster crows, sounding more offended than triumphant, and somewhere behind a half-collapsed fence, a dog begins to bark, as if reminding everyone that the sun hasn't officially signed off on this morning yet. You inhale and catch the faint scent of something earthy, maybe peat burning, maybe damp wool drying by a hearth. You also get the much less romantic smell of a manure pile quietly steaming beside a cottage. Ah, yes, rustic charm. Modern nostalgia tends to forget how pungent medieval life could be. But don't worry, you're easing into it. Up ahead, a woman pushes open her cottage door. She's bundled in layers, her breath ghosting around her face as she steps outside to scatter feed for her hens. The birds rush toward her, wings flapping, feet skittering over the frost. Chickens were precious winter assets, you remember, especially when fresh eggs were scarce. She glances at you, not alarmed, just curious travelers pass through villages all the time, though perhaps not ones wearing your frankly suspicious blend of modern posture and bewilderment. You keep walking. A thin ribbon of smoke curls from a nearby smithy where the blacksmith is already awake, poking embers back to life. His hammer rests on the anvil, damp with the night's moisture. One quirky detail medieval villagers believed something that would have seemed perfectly normal to them is that the devil disliked metalwork on holy days, so some craftsmen refused to hammer iron at Christmas for fear they'd tempt infernal attention. And honestly, on mornings like this, with the fog hanging low and silence clinging to the earth, you can almost imagine why. A cart creaks past you, pulled by an ox moving with deliberate slowness. Its hooves sink into slushy patches where yesterday's snow briefly softened under afternoon sun. The driver nods politely and mutters something about checking on a neighbour's roof beam. Winter storms were notorious for exposing structural weaknesses, and nobody wanted a collapse right before the feast. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers were more communal or more self-serving than we imagine, but on cold mornings like this, you definitely see the cooperative side. Survival required mutual care. Your fingers sting in the cold, so you tuck them under your arms. The village green appears ahead, a lopsided patch of frozen mud circled by cottages. A wooden cross stands at its center, its base wrapped in a brittle garland of last season's herbs. Someone placed it there weeks ago, hoping to ward off illness. And in a way, it seems to work at least symbolically. People need symbols in times like these. A bell tolls once, a short, low note from the distant church. It's not the call to service yet, just the priest marking the early hour. The church sits on a slight rise at the end of the lane, its stone walls glistening with frost. You imagine what it feels like inside. Cold, cavernous, smelling faintly of wax and damp stone. Even so, villagers will gather there soon, not only to pray but to exchange murmured greetings, gossip, and hints about the Christmas preparations underway. But for now, the village is mostly quiet. A few children run across the lane chasing each other, their laughter sharp and quick in the cold air. One slips and falls, then pops back up, brushing snow off their tunic with a grin. You catch the way their cheeks are flushed, bright pink, the universal shade of, "I've been outside too long in winter, but I'm not going inside yet." Your path curves toward the small stream that cuts through the village. Though partially frozen, water still trickles beneath the thin sheet of ice, whispering in the hush of morning. You lean over the bank and touch the air above the water. It feels even colder here. A pair of women approach carrying wooden buckets. They nod at you before lowering their pails into the slow-moving water. Their hands must be freezing, you think, but they barely react. Hardship is simply woven into their rhythm. Behind them, a man leads a goat toward a makeshift pen. He mutters under his breath about the creature's stubbornness, tugging the rope as the goat pretends not to understand. Goats, despite their reputation for mischief, were invaluable in winter. Milk, hides, meat if things got dire. And if you're wondering whether medieval animals were smaller than today's, yes, absolutely. Selective breeding hadn't achieved the giant modern sizes yet. In fact, many medieval cows would look like large goats to you. It's a charming detail until you realize it means less milk, less butter, less everything. You rub your hands together for warmth. The village is fully awakening now, doors opening, animals moving, voices rising in faint snippets. Someone calls out about preparing dough for the Christmas loaf. Another talks about repairing a sleigh runner. And beneath it all, a gentle hum of anticipation lingers. Christmas is coming, slowly but steadily, and despite the cold, despite the work, despite the scarcity of winter, people cling to the promise of warmth and festivity. You move toward the edge of the village, where wooden fences give way to snowy fields. The sun has finally scraped itself above the horizon, throwing a pale light across the landscape. You can see smoke rising from distant farms and hear the sharp pecking of a woodpecker somewhere in the trees. You pause, letting the cold air fill your lungs. This is your first true glimpse of what medieval Christmas feels like. Quiet, fragile, hopeful, in a way that's almost unfamiliar. And as you stand there, snow settling lightly on your shoulders, you realize the day is just beginning, and countless moments, strange, beautiful, and unexpected, are waiting for you farther down the path. You make your way toward the village market, following the faint clatter of wooden wheels and the soft murmur of voices gathering with the morning light. The snow crunches beneath your feet in a slow, steady rhythm that feels almost hypnotic. As you approach the crooked stalls, you realize how different a medieval winter market feels from the cheerful, glittering versions you might know today. This one is smaller, rougher, tighter, and yet somehow more alive beneath the frost. The first thing you notice is the smell, not cinnamon and mulled wine, more like cold earth mixed with smoked meat and last night's fire lingering on wool cloaks. A few villagers have laid out goods on wooden boards supported by barrels. Others simply sit on low stools with baskets in front of them. It is not much, but scarcity gives every object a kind of quiet importance. You step closer to a stall where a woman sells coarse cloth folded in uneven rectangles. She runs her fingers along the fabric while explaining its weave to a customer. This is your mainstream fact of the moment. Wool-dominated winter clothing in the medieval world. and entire local economies depended on it. The woman glances at you, offering a thin smile as if to say she knows you are not here to buy, but she appreciates the company anyway. A man nearby lifts a basket filled with onions. They are shriveled and tough, nothing like the plump bulbs you would find at a modern grocery store, but they are precious. Someone else sells dried fish, stiff as wood. A few lucky vendors display small pots of honey. Honey is a luxury, especially in winter, and you can feel the crowd lean in slightly whenever a jar is unwrapped. You wander deeper into the cluster of stalls. Your fingers grow numb again, so you tuck them into your sleeves. A farmer waves at you, trying to tempt you with a bundle of winter herbs tied neatly with a strand of flax. You bend to smell them. They are sharp, resinous, slightly medicinal, perfect for flavoring stews or warding off the cold, depending on who you ask. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed that placing rosemary beneath a pillow during the 12 days could protect dreams from mischievous spirits. You imagine someone tossing and turning, trying to decide whether the fragrance is comforting or overwhelming. The livestock section of the market sits a little farther from the main cluster. You approach cautiously. Animals in winter are not particularly happy creatures. A few geese honk to protest the cold, their breath puffing out like tiny steam clouds. A pair of pigs snuffle at the ground, hoping for scraps. One cow stands tethered to a post, her hide dusted with frost, that the farmer brushes away with gentle, almost apologetic strokes. Medieval livestock was smaller, more compact, and hardier in many ways, but winter made every creature look a little defeated. You drift back toward the human bustle where two merchants are quietly arguing over the price of a sack of barley. Their voices rise, punctuated by the occasional gesture that looks dramatic but is perfectly polite by medieval standards. Historians still argue whether medieval markets were spaces of strict regulation or informal negotiation, and watching this duo, you can see why the debate never quite settles. They haggle with intensity, yet the moment the price is agreed upon, their tension melts into laughter. Friendship wrapped in competition, commerce wrapped in community. A group of children weave through the adults, giggling behind cupped hands. One of them carries a small wooden hoop. He rolls it along the icy ground with a stick, guiding it in wobbly arcs that send the others sprinting to keep up. They wear simple tunics layered with patched wool leggings, and some of their shoes are mismatched. You notice one child letting a tiny wax candle roll in his palm. Maybe he traded for it. Maybe he found it. Candles were valuable, but children in all centuries liked small treasures. A baker stands behind a table where several loaves sit cooling on a cloth. They are dense and sturdy, the kind that could survive a week without turning to mold. His breath fogs as he talks proudly about his Christmas loaf, a special recipe he will make tomorrow. He invites you to feel the crust of a bread he baked last night. You press a finger into it, hard as armor. The baker laughs and tells you that if bread does not challenge your teeth a little, it is not real bread. You pretend to agree. From the corner of your eye, you see a man with a dagger at his belt carving a small wooden toy. He works quickly, shaving curls of wood from a block until a horse begins to emerge beneath his hands. He pauses to warm his fingers over a brazier. You can tell he is one of those people who seems to fit into the medieval world perfectly, as if born to it. You offer a compliment. He shrugs modestly, though you can tell he loves the attention. The market square grows busier as the sun climbs, though the light still has a weak, wintry quality. You notice how people gather in small clusters, exchanging news and gossip in low voices. Someone mentions a merchant who arrived yesterday with foreign cloth. Another whispers about a neighbour who saw strange lights near the churchyard last night. The medieval mind was always negotiating the boundary between superstition and belief. And honestly, when the fog moves the way it does here, you might believe in strange lights too. A woman selling eggs calls out to you, offering a sample. You laugh gently and wave your hands, knowing a raw egg is not exactly something you can taste in the middle of a frozen market lane. She chuckles and tucks it back into her basket. She tells you how her hens slowed their laying as soon as winter arrived. It was a constant challenge. Families sometimes set aside the last few eggs of autumn to be used in Christmas meals. If a hen laid on Christmas Eve, the family considered it a good omen for the coming year. You step toward the edge of the market and take in the entire scene. Stalls clustered unevenly. Snow pressed into brown slush where dozens of feet have passed. A soft murmur of conversation, punctuated by the occasional bray of a donkey or the sharp clack of a dropped bucket. It is chaotic and peaceful at the same time. It is also a reminder of how precious winter commerce was. People needed this space for materials, food, company, and reassurance that their neighbours had survived another cold night. A young boy approaches with a bundle of twigs tied together with string. He asks if you need fire starters. You shake your head, and he shrugs good-naturedly before trotting off to try his luck elsewhere. His face is slightly smudged with soot, and he whistles a tune that sounds half cheerful and half improvised. You wonder if his hands ever truly warm up during winter. Nearby, two elderly women sit together with baskets of hand-spun yarn. Their fingers move with deliberate speed, twisting fibers with practiced precision. They gossip in soft voices about preparations for the coming feast day. One mentions the church decorations. The other talks about a neighbour who insists she saw an omen in the frost patterns on her window. Humans always search for meaning in small things. Winter makes that instinct even stronger. The sky shifts as a breeze moves across the market. You pull your cloak tighter and watch a flurry of snow drift down, thin but persistent. The merchants barely react. Snow is simply part of life here. One man wipes a dusting off his display of iron tools. Another covers his apples with a cloth. Everything is practical, swift, efficient. And through it all, there is a subtle but unmistakable hum of anticipation. Winter markets are not only about survival, they are about community, celebration, the small luxuries that make the cold bearable. Even the quiet ones who barely speak seem lighter today. Christmas is close enough that people can taste the hope it brings. You take one more slow breath of the cold air, feeling it sting your lungs. The market is behind you now, but the memory of it lingers. The sounds, the smells, the faces, and the soft promise that this season, even in its harshness, carries moments of warmth waiting to be found just beyond the next snow-packed path. You walk slowly up the gentle rise that leads toward the manor estate, feeling the shift in atmosphere long before the building itself comes into view. The villagers behind you go about their business with a kind of rugged informality, but here the air grows heavier, more disciplined. Your boots slip a little on a patch of frozen mud, and you steady yourself as the outline of the manor begins to emerge through the pale winter light. It is not the towering castle you might imagine from fantasy films. Instead, it is a long timber-framed hall with a stone undercroft, solid enough to withstand winter storms but far from glamorous. Even so, it radiates influence. This is where decisions are made. This is where status lives. As you approach, you notice a pair of servants sweeping the threshold with stiff broom bristles. Their movements are quick, almost nervous. According to commonly accepted medieval records, the household staff worked tirelessly before feast days, and Christmas demanded an especially intense flurry of preparation. Their faces are pink from the cold, and one of them stops to blow on her numb fingers before returning to her task. You offer a nod. She glances at you with polite caution, as if unsure whether you belong among the humbler visitors or the honoured ones. The wooden doors of the manor swing open briefly, letting out a wave of warmer air mixed with the scent of hearth smoke and herbs. A steward steps outside with a ledger tucked beneath his arm. His cloak is neatly clasped with a small metal brooch that catches the weak sunlight. He surveys the courtyard, mentally cataloguing which chores remain incomplete. A moment later, he barks instructions at a pair of young men hauling sacks of grain. The manor relies on the village to supply food, repairs and labour, but during Christmas it must also demonstrate generosity in return. The balance between authority and obligation feels almost like a tightrope. You take a few more steps toward the main entrance. Someone inside strikes metal against stone, probably sharpening a carving knife or a tool that will be used for the feast. The sound echoes through the courtyard in steady metallic clicks. One servant rushes past you carrying a stack of straw mats. Another lugs, a bucket sloshing with water that spills onto her skirt, making her wince. She mutters something about freezing hems and hurriedly ducks indoors. Near the side of the hall, a cook and two helpers stand around a wooden table covered with vegetables wrapped in frost. They are trimming away the soft spots and nodding to each other in approval, each time they find a piece still suitable for the Christmas preparations. While you watch, the cook picks up a battered copper pot, taps its rim, and declares it worthy for one more season. You smile a little. This is the medieval version of resourcefulness. Nothing wasted, nothing taken for granted. You shift your attention to the manor walls themselves. Ivy creeps across the boards in long, dark strands. The windows are narrow and covered with horn panes that let in light while keeping out the wind. A carved wooden figure of a saint watches over the doorway. Its features are weathered, and one hand is chipped, but it still gives the impression of silent guardianship. Few modern visitors realize that many medieval manors used religious symbols, almost like protective charms during harsh winters. Just beyond the hall, you notice a cluster of sheds and small outbuildings. A stable boy is struggling to coax a stubborn horse into its stall. The animal stamps its hooves, annoyed by the cold. The boy whispers soothing words in its ear. Animals were essential to a manor's productivity, and winter required vigilance. A single illness could disrupt the entire household rhythm. You wander around the back of the manor, where the smokehouse sits on a slightly raised patch of ground. A thin veil of fragrant smoke escapes through its vent. Inside, strips of meat hang from hooks, glistening in the dim light. The preservation of food was both an art and a gamble in this climate. According to well-regarded accounts from the period, smoked and salted meats were precious winter staples that could make the difference between a lean season and a disastrous one. A chilly breeze sweeps across the courtyard, making you pull your cloak tighter. Overhead, a pair of crows circle lazily before settling on the roof. They ruffle their feathers and stare down at the activity with an unsettling kind of intelligence. In some regions, people believed that crows near a manor just before Christmas hinted at a shift in fortune. Whether that was good or bad depended on the storyteller. You glance at them with mild suspicion before continuing your exploration. A maid approaches carrying a bundle of greenery. Sprigs of holly, ivy, and maybe a branch of yew peek out from her arms. She hurries toward the hall, carefully avoiding the slush so she does not soil her skirt. Decorative greenery served both symbolic and aesthetic purposes, a custom deeply rooted in pre-Christian traditions, but seamlessly folded into Christian celebrations. She nearly stumbles when you offer to hold the door for her, surprised that a stranger would bother. Her cheeks redden as she thanks you and darts inside. You follow her through the doorway, stepping into the dim interior of the great hall. The warmth hits you immediately, though it is not the comfortable, even heating of modern rooms. Instead, it is a patchwork warmth, strongest near the central hearth and weaker along the edges. Your eyes adjust slowly. Long trestle tables line the walls. A high table at the far end is draped with a cloth that looks far finer than anything you saw in the village market. Servants are polishing cups, arranging benches, and hanging decorations from beams overhead. Above you, the rafters stretch like the ribs of a giant creature. Shadows cling between them. Candles flicker along the walls, giving the hall a gentle golden glow. You step farther in and inhale the mingling scents of wood smoke, herbs, animal hides, and warming ale. The atmosphere feels expectant, almost like the hall itself is preparing to breathe differently when the feast begins. A man in a worn but dignified tunic approaches and asks if you need assistance. His voice is polite but guarded, shaped by training and hierarchy. You tell him you are simply observing. He nods and explains that the household has spent weeks preparing for the Christmas celebrations. He mentions that the Lord intends to host not only the immediate household, but also some neighbouring tenants. You sense both pride and pressure in his tone. He then casually mentions that there is disagreement among chroniclers about whether all manors observed the same level of generosity during this season. You imagine the contrast between a lavish feast in one household and a modest one in another. Social rank decided everything. You thank him and wander toward a small alcove where embroidered banners rest against the wall. The needlework is intricate, though slightly frayed around the edges. One banner depicts a boar, another features a star, a third shows a chalice. These symbols have layered meanings that vary from region to region. One curious detail you recall is that some manors used such banners to subtly communicate alliances or past victories, even during religious celebrations. As you stand near the hearth, two servants walk past while whispering about the arrangements for tomorrow. One wonders whether the travelling minstrel who visited last winter will return. The other complains about how many trenchers they must carve from stale bread. Their conversation paints a picture not often highlighted in history books. Christmas at a manor was both elegant and exhausting. The work never stopped. It only changed rhythm. Another servant arrives with a bucket of warm water and pours it carefully into a basin. She wipes her forehead with her sleeve and mutters about the cold making her joints stiff. You feel a tug of sympathy. This world asks a lot from its people, yet they seem to tackle it with a resilience that feels almost unreal. You take one last slow look around the hall. The glow, the bustle, the faint hum of anticipation. This is the heart of the manor. And as you step back toward the door, you understand more clearly that Christmas here is not simply a celebration. It is the moment when hierarchy softens just enough for generosity to flow downward, even if only for a short time. You step outside again into the cold air. The sky has begun to brighten, though the sun still hides behind a thin curtain of winter clouds. The courtyard is busier now. More voices, more movement, more signs that Christmas is drawing near. You walk away from the manor with a growing sense that what lies ahead will show you even more about how this season shaped every corner of medieval life. You make your way down the sloping path that leads away from the manor, letting the crisp air clear the warmth of the great hall from your senses. Soon the imposing structure fades behind the curve of the land, replaced once again by the humbler shapes of village cottages. Their roofs sag beneath small mounds of snow, and thin tendrils of smoke rise from chimneys that look almost too fragile to withstand winter winds. You pause at the edge of the lane, letting your eyes adjust to the softer, more intimate scale of everyday life. This is where most medieval Christmas preparations truly happened, in close quarters filled with routine, hope, and the need to stretch every resource. As you approach the first cottage, you hear the rhythmic sound of someone chopping kindling. A man stands beside a narrow woodpile, his breath puffing out in steady bursts as he lifts the hatchet again. According to descriptions found in several well-regarded accounts of medieval village life, households spent much of December gathering fuel for the long nights, and a Christmas fire was considered essential for warmth and symbolism. The man wipes his brow with the sleeve of his rough wool tunic, then nods to you as if acknowledging a fellow survivor of the cold. You walk toward the cottage door, ducking under a low beam that forces you to stoop. The doorway is so small you wonder how tall villagers navigated daily life without perpetual bruises. Inside, a woman crouches near the hearth, stirring a pot that hangs over a modest flame. Steam coils upward and fills the small room with the scent of root vegetables. The walls are plastered with a mixture of straw and clay, and the floor beneath your feet is packed earth, smooth from years of footsteps. The woman greets you warmly, though with a slightly puzzled glance, as if unsure what business you might have with a household like hers. You take in the surroundings. A small window covered with oiled linen lets in a faint spill of daylight. A low bed occupies the corner, piled with blankets made from worn wool. Dried herbs hang from beams overhead. In the faint light they cast spidery shadows that sway with each flicker of the fire. A toddler toddles past you in uneven steps, clutching a wooden spoon like a treasured relic. His cheeks are rosy from the heat of the hearth, which feels comforting despite its uneven warmth. The woman laughs softly and adjusts a shawl around her shoulders. She explains that she is preparing a simple dish made from turnips, onions, and whatever scraps remain from earlier in the week. It is not a feast yet, but it is hearty and familiar. She tells you that the real cooking will begin tomorrow when the village contributes to the community celebration. A curious detail you recall from a collection of rural customs is that some families placed a small dish of grain beside the hearth on Christmas Eve as a sign of goodwill toward household spirits. Whether this household will do so remains to be seen, but you notice a bowl already set aside on the table, and for a moment you wonder about its purpose. The man who was chopping wood enters through the door, stamping snow from his boots. He hangs his hat on a peg and settles beside the fire. You sense a comfortable rhythm between the two adults, shaped by years of shared labor. They speak to each other in low tones while continuing their tasks. The woman doles out a portion of the simmering stew to taste, checking the seasoning. He comments on the thickness. It is simple domestic conversation, but it grounds the scene with a kind of quiet authenticity. You glance toward the ceiling where smoke curls into the thatch. It escapes through a small hole in the roof, though much of it lingers inside the cottage. Your eyes water slightly. Medieval homes rarely had chimneys as you know them, and smoke inside was normal. People believed that the darkened rafters kept pests away. Whether this belief had any truth is uncertain, but it speaks to the way necessity shaped folklore. A young girl sits on a low stool beside the bed. She is mending a tear in a wool tunic with precise, careful stitches. Her fingers move with quiet skill. She offers you a shy smile. You return it, then watch as she ties off the thread with a small knot. A moment later, she stands to show her mother, who praises her handiwork. The girl beams, and the warmth of that expression rivals the glow of the hearth. The family invites you to sit for a moment, and you lower yourself onto a wooden bench. It creaks softly beneath your weight. The man explains that tomorrow will be busy for everyone. Some families will bring bread, others ale, others meats or cheeses. He tells you that people contribute according to what they can afford, and that Christmas is one of the rare times when even modest households feel a sense of collective abundance. He also mentions that scholars do not entirely agree on whether every village practiced communal celebrations or if this varied widely by region. You can imagine how geography, wealth, and local tradition might influence each community differently. The woman adds that she hopes the weather will improve before sunrise. Last year, a storm swept through the village on Christmas Eve, burying the footpaths beneath heavy snow and delaying the procession to the church. She describes the chaos of trudging through drifts while carrying baskets of food and trying to keep candles from blowing out. You picture it clearly, and you have to admire their perseverance. The toddler begins banging the spoon on a small wooden bucket, creating a hollow thump that fills the cottage. His sister laughs and imitates the sound by tapping her thimble on the stool. The rhythm becomes a little household symphony, cheerful in its randomness. It reminds you that medieval life, though difficult, was not without moments of joy. The family's dog wanders in from outside. He is small, scruffy, and clearly beloved. He trots directly to the hearth and collapses in a fluffy heap, soaking in the warmth. The girl reaches down to scratch behind his ears, and the dog sighs in contentment. You cannot help but smile. Even in the 15th century, dogs knew exactly how to find the best spot in the house. The woman stands and moves to a wooden chest near the bed. She lifts the lid and reveals folded garments inside. She explains that these are the clothes set aside for Christmas Day. They are not fancy by modern standards, but they are carefully kept, mended, and saved for important occasions. She holds up a tunic decorated with a line of simple stitching around the collar. You notice how the fabric, though coarse, has been brushed smooth. People here might not have many possessions, but they pour intention into the few they own. A small clay lamp flickers on the table, its flame dancing gently. The woman adjusts the wick. She tells you that oil was sometimes scarce during winter, so they used it sparingly. Tonight they will let it burn longer to prepare for Christmas. You can feel her excitement. It is subtle, modest, but unmistakably present. The man fetches a bundle of dried rushes from a corner and begins weaving them into floor mats. His movements are slow and meditative. These mats will help insulate the cottage from the cold seeping up through the ground. He tells you that winters have grown unpredictable and that each year requires a different set of strategies. You can sense the quiet resilience that defines this community. The girl returns to her sewing while the toddler crawls into her lap. The mother ladles stew into wooden bowls, and the aroma fills the cottage with comforting warmth. She sets aside a portion for a neighbour who lives alone. Hospitality is both a duty and a kindness here. It shapes relationships as much as labour and land. You feel the atmosphere settling into a comfortable evening rhythm. The cottage is dim but welcoming, smoky but warm, humble but filled with small acts of care. It reveals a side of medieval Christmas that history books sometimes overlook. The season was not just about grand feasts or church rituals. It was woven deeply into ordinary households where people prepared not only food and clothes, but also their hearts for a brief moment of wonder in the middle of winter. You thank the family and step back out into the crisp air. The sky has shifted into the soft grey of late afternoon. Snowflakes drift down in slow spirals, settling on your shoulders. You glance back at the cottage, its windows glowing with a faint golden light. Then you continue down the path, eager to discover how the wider world beyond these walls is preparing for the coming celebration. You follow the path toward the small church that overlooks the village, feeling the shift from domestic warmth to spiritual anticipation. The sky above has taken on that pale winter colour that seems neither fully day nor evening, a kind of quiet suspension that mirrors the mood of the season. As you walk, the snow crunches softly under your feet, and your breath rises in thin white ribbons. The closer you come to the church, the more you feel a solemn energy settling around you. Advent is passing into its final days, and people carry a mixture of hope, discipline, and weary determination. The church itself sits on a slight rise, built of rough grey stone that holds on to cold like a memory. A small wooden porch extends from the front, its beams darkened by age and weather. Someone has hung sprigs of evergreen along the doorway, their scent carrying faintly on the air. According to several commonly referenced medieval calendars, Advent was a time of fasting and reflection, often far more austere than modern observers imagine. The villagers below have been living with tightened belts and quiet prayers for weeks, saving what little they can for Christmas Day. You push open the creaking door and step inside. The temperature drops several degrees instantly. The stone walls swallow the warmth of your body, and you wrap your cloak closer around yourself. Yet the cold does not feel unwelcoming. It feels contemplative, like an invitation to stillness. The interior is dim, lit by a few scattered candles that flicker against the walls. Their yellow glow dances across faded religious paintings and wooden carvings worn smooth by generations of hands. A priest stands near the altar, adjusting a cloth embroidered with gold thread. You can tell this is one of the church's most precious items. It is taken out only for the holiest occasions. He hums under his breath as he works, a simple chant that echoes gently through the space. When he notices you, he gives a small nod, then returns to his task. You wander slowly down the aisle, taking in the scent of wax, cold stone, and a faint hint of incense lingering from earlier prayers. A young acolyte kneels at one of the benches, polishing a brass candlestick with determined strokes. She glances up when she hears your footsteps and offers a shy smile before lowering her head again. According to some of the better documented parish traditions, children often helped prepare the church for Christmas, seeing it as both an honour and a duty. The girl pauses for a moment to warm her hands before continuing her work. You run your fingers along the back of a wooden pew. The surface is smooth in places and rough in others, shaped by centuries of use. A tiny carved symbol catches your eye, something that looks like a star or perhaps a flower. It might have been etched by a restless parishioner ages ago. One of the small details that rarely makes its way into histories of medieval worship is how often people left little marks like this, quiet traces of presence. A man enters carrying a bundle of fresh greenery. Holly, ivy, and small branches of fir spill from his arms. He bows slightly to the priest before draping the decorations along the chancel rail. The greens brighten the dim space with their deep colours and add an earthy fragrance to the air. You recall reading that greenery served as a reminder of life enduring through winter, a symbol adopted from older customs and repurposed into the rhythm of Christian worship. The blend of past and present feels very clear here. A bell rope hangs near the door, frayed from many winters of use. You imagine the sound it will make later, ringing across the snow-covered village to call people to the Christmas Eve service. The echo bouncing off the hills, the children running in excitement, the adults pulling cloaks tighter as they hurry up the path. A memory not yet lived but somehow familiar. In a small side chapel, two women arrange candles with meticulous care. They whisper to each other as they work. One mentions that last year they ran out of wax and had to melt down old candle stubs. The other responds that she hopes the bees will be plentiful in spring so they can replenish their stores. Their quiet conversation reveals how deeply the season's shape lives here. Every resource has a cycle. Every shortage has a consequence. You kneel for a moment near the altar, not out of obligation but to feel the stillness more fully. The cold seeps through the stone floor into your knees, but the silence around you holds a kind of gentle weight. A few villagers enter quietly, lighting candles one by one. The glow grows warmer as flames accumulate. A soft murmur of prayer spreads through the hall. Nearby, two elders sit together on a bench, recalling past winters. One of them mentions that some older texts describe Advent as a season of strict discipline, though he laughs and adds that people sometimes found small ways to bend the rules. The other counters by saying that different regions followed different customs, and that researchers still debate how uniform these traditions actually were. Their discussion is calm, reflective, full of the kind of lived knowledge that bridges the gap between record and reality. A gust of wind rattles the church door. Snowflakes flutter inside before settling on the stone floor. A boy hurries over to sweep them away with a bundle of straw. He hums a tune as he works, perhaps a practice run for the hymns he will sing tomorrow. You notice that he looks both excited and nervous. Christmas is a major moment in the village rhythm, and everyone has a role to play. The priest finishes arranging the altar cloth and steps back to admire the effect. His expression softens. Then he crosses the room with slow, thoughtful steps, pausing beside you. He tells you that this time of year always brings a mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude for survival, fear of the months still ahead. He explains that the church attempts to offer comfort during Advent, reminding people that winter is not only hardship but also a promise of renewal. His voice carries a gentle certainty shaped by years of guiding a small flock. You watch him move toward the choir stalls where a book of chants rests open. The pages are thick and yellowed. Inked notes rise and fall like tiny mountains across the parchment. He runs a hand over them and hums again, almost under his breath. The melody echoes faintly through the rafters. The harmony feels ancient, steady, comforting. A visitor arrives carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She approaches the priest and places it on the altar. You learn that it contains a few candles she made at home, offered as a gift for the Christmas services. Her hands tremble slightly from the cold, but her eyes glow with quiet pride. Simple contributions like this were essential for parish life, especially in smaller villages with limited resources. The sun outside begins to fade, casting long beams of light through the small windows. The church fills with a soft golden haze. Work slows as people step back to admire the scene. The greenery, the candles, the polished brass, the carefully arranged altar. A shared creation shaped by many hands. You linger near the rear of the church, letting the atmosphere wash over you. The hush, the scent of holly, the faint sound of chanting from someone practicing alone. It feels peaceful, almost sacred, even for a modern visitor who did not grow up with these customs. Advent here is not only a wait for Christmas. It is a pause in the middle of winter where time stretches differently, quieter and deeper. You step outside again, into the crisp evening air. The light has dimmed, and the first stars begin to emerge in the wide winter sky. Behind you, the church glows faintly through the windows, a beacon of anticipation. Ahead, the path leads back down toward the village, where homes flicker with early lamplight. You follow it slowly, knowing that the next steps will bring you deeper into the heart of how medieval people experienced the holiday season. You follow the narrow road that winds away from the village centre, feeling the cold bite a little deeper as the path flattens into open countryside. The snow here is untouched except for a few scattered tracks, each one telling a story. A pair of cart ruts frozen into the earth, hoofprints spaced evenly like musical notes. A trail of small boot marks where someone hurried along before sunrise. You step carefully between them, your breath rising in soft white clouds. The winter road stretches ahead in a gentle curve, bordered by hedges stripped bare of leaves. Their branches reach out, like thin fingers, clicking lightly in the breeze. According to several well-documented travel accounts from the later Middle Ages, winter journeys were notoriously difficult, yet people still travelled for trade, pilgrimage, or family duties. The cold season did not stop movement. It only made every mile feel more precious. A distant figure appears on the ridge. The silhouette grows clearer as you walk, resolving into a traveller bundled in layers of rough wool. A staff taps the frozen ground with steady rhythm. When he draws closer, you notice the small wooden box tied to his belt. Inside, he explains, are relics he carries from village to village. He is a kind of wandering religious hawker, a role more common than most people today imagine. Some villagers welcomed such visitors for the stories they brought. Others eyed them with suspicion. The man nods politely before continuing down the road. His staff leaves a neat line of punctures in the snow behind him. You watch him vanish around a bend, then listen to the silence settle again. The landscape feels vast in its stillness, a white canvas stretching in every direction. A little farther on, you hear the distant creak of wheels. A cart approaches slowly, pulled by a pair of oxen whose breath rises like steam. A merchant sits atop the wooden plank seat, wrapped tightly in a cloak. He greets you with a weary smile. The cart bed behind him is loaded with sacks, pottery, and what looks like a bundle of woolen cloth. He tells you that he is bound for the next market town, hoping to arrive before nightfall. He taps one of the sacks and mentions that some of the goods inside were traded earlier that morning. He chuckles as he describes the difficulty of keeping pottery from cracking in the cold. You walk beside the cart for a moment. The oxen plod patiently, their hooves compressing the snow with each heavy step. The merchant warns you to avoid travelling alone late in the day. Winter roads could be treacherous, not only because of weather, but also because of predators, both human and animal. According to many chronicles from the period, wolves sometimes followed travellers for miles, waiting for weakness. Whether every account is accurate remains uncertain, but the stories shaped how people approached the winter landscape. You thank the merchant and continue walking as he urges his team onward. The sound of wheels fades, replaced by the faint rustle of wind through the hedges. The road narrows as it passes between two sloping fields blanketed in white. A group of crows pecks at something near a hedge, then flutters upward as you approach. Their wings make a soft, leathery sound in the quiet air. A small shrine stands beside the road a few paces ahead. It is built from stones stacked without mortar, topped with a simple wooden roof. Inside rests a carving of the Virgin Mary, her face worn smooth by weather and time. Someone has left a sprig of holly at the base. Another person placed a wax votive that has melted into a puddle of amber. Roadside shrines like this appear frequently in medieval records, often marking the paths taken by pilgrims journeying to larger monasteries or holy sites. Travellers paused here for safety and blessing. As you linger near the shrine, you hear the crunch of footsteps behind you. Two pilgrims approach, carrying small bags slung across their shoulders. They greet you warmly and ask if you are heading toward the abbey several miles ahead. Their accents hint at a long journey. The taller pilgrim explains that they have been walking for weeks, stopping in villages to rest and share prayer. He proudly displays a small badge pinned to his cloak, indicating a shrine they visited earlier. Pilgrim badges were common tokens, both devotional and practical. They proved your journey, but they also acted as conversation starters when meeting other travelers. The shorter pilgrim adjusts her cloak and laughs softly as she admits that the winter has been harsher than expected. She describes how a snowstorm forced them to shelter in a barn 2 nights earlier. They slept near cattle, sharing warmth and hay, and woke covered in dust and straw. You nod sympathetically, imagining the scene with surprising clarity. She then adds that records from certain monastic guestbooks mention such unexpected lodgings with surprising frequency, proof that travelers improvised constantly. You walk with the pilgrims for a short while. They share stories of the villages they passed. One tale involves a house where the family left a small loaf shaped like a star for wandering travelers during Advent. Another tale describes a farmer who believed he had seen a ghostly procession on a frozen pond. Whether or not the man truly witnessed anything supernatural remains unclear, yet stories like this spread easily in winter, when long nights invited imagination. The road eventually forks, and the pilgrims take the path toward the abbey. They thank you for the company and offer a blessing for safe travel. You watch them disappear into a patch of forest, their voices fading into the wind. You stop to rest near a wooden fence where the land dips into a shallow valley. The view is wide and hushed. Smoke rises from distant farmsteads. The faint sound of a bell drifts across the landscape. It could be from a small chapel, or perhaps from a shepherd calling his flock. Sheep still graze in patches where the snow is thin. Their wool forms shaggy clumps that look surprisingly warm. You begin walking again. The snow grows deeper in places, forcing you to lift your knees higher with each step. A rabbit darts across the road, leaving delicate tracks behind. A moment later, a fox lurks near a hedge, its red fur bright against the snow. You freeze briefly, watching the silent tension between predator and prey ripple through the air. The fox eventually slips away, uninterested in you. Another mile passes before you encounter a group of traveling musicians sheltering beneath a grove of bare trees. They sit around a small fire, tuning their instruments. One plucks a stringed lute, testing chords. Another warms her hands and blows into a wooden flute. They invite you to sit for a moment, and you accept. The fire feels wonderful on your chilled fingers. They tell you they are making their way to a manor where they hope to perform during the Christmas festivities. Travelling minstrels relied heavily on winter hospitality, and according to certain guild records, many estates welcomed musicians during this season to elevate their celebrations. The group laughs as one man recounts a story about a feast where the host requested a tune for every dish served. By the end of the night, the musicians were exhausted, and the Lord had fallen asleep in his chair. One of the minstrels strums a gentle melody. The notes float through the air, soft and clear. For a moment, the road, the cold, the distance all feel suspended in the music. You linger until the fire begins to crackle low. Then you stand, thank them, and continue along the road. As the light fades, the sky takes on a lavender tint that stretches across the horizon. You see the village in the distance again, its cluster of rooftops huddled together against the cold. Smoke rises steadily from chimneys. People move along the paths carrying baskets and lanterns. The world feels smaller, safer, more welcoming. You walk toward the village with quiet steps, carrying the stories of pilgrims, merchants, and wandering musicians in your mind. Winter roads may be harsh, yet they weave together the lives of countless travelers and locals, forming a network of shared experiences that gives the Christmas season its depth. Ahead waits the next part of your journey, filled with shadows, superstition, and the ancient whispers that cling to winter nights. You return toward the village with a slow, steady stride, the cold settling more comfortably around you now that the sky has dimmed into a soft winter blue. Lanterns begin to glow one by one along the narrow paths, flickering through shutter cracks like watchful eyes. As you walk, you sense a different mood taking shape beneath the surface of daily tasks. something older, quieter, and far less official than church rituals or manor duties. The edges of the medieval Christmas season hold fragments of the past that never quite disappeared, and tonight you feel those fragments stirring like whispers in the frost. You pass a group of women carrying baskets of greenery. They laugh softly among themselves, but their conversation turns serious when you draw closer. One of them mentions the need to hang holly above the doorway before nightfall. According to widely referenced local customs, holly was believed to guard against misfortune, especially during the darkest nights of winter. The sharp leaves and bright berries were thought to repel ill-meaning spirits. The woman gestures toward her cottage as she speaks, explaining that she once forgot to hang holly and woke up to find her chickens unsettled and her stored grain slightly disturbed. She insists it was not an animal. You nod politely, unsure whether she is teasing or entirely sincere. A child runs past you carrying a small bundle of straw. He stops beside a doorway and tucks the straw carefully into the thatch. When you ask about it, he grins and tells you that some families place straw in the rafters for good luck during the 12 days. The practice varies from place to place, but many believe that straw brings blessings related to prosperity or protection. You recall reading in a folkloric compilation that villagers sometimes claimed the straw warmed the spirits of ancestors visiting during the season. The line between custom and belief blurs easily in winter. You continue along the path toward the village outskirts where shadows stretch longer and silence grows heavier. The air smells of cold earth and wood smoke. A pair of old men sit on a bench outside a cottage, bundled in thick cloaks. They nod to you and invite you to share a moment of conversation. One of them taps his walking stick on the ground as he tells you about certain winter nights when the boundary between the living and the unseen felt thinner. He insists that people once believed the dead wandered silently along the lanes seeking familiar homes. He adds that he never witnessed such a thing himself, but he swears he heard unusual footsteps outside his door on a past Christmas Eve. His companion chuckles and counters that the footsteps were probably a fox, not a spirit. He shakes his head and notes that early chroniclers rarely agreed on which winter beliefs were widespread and which were localized. Even today, researchers cannot fully determine how far certain customs extended, because stories traveled faster than reliable documentation. You can see the friendly debate in their eyes, the kind born from decades of shared winters. Further ahead, a faint melody drifts from a small cluster of cottages. The notes rise and fall with an oddly haunting lilt. You follow the sound and discover several villagers gathered around a simple wooden table. One woman holds a hand drum. Another taps a stick lightly against a clay pot. They are practicing a winter chant that seems older than the church hymns you heard earlier. The rhythm feels primal, shaped by long nights and deep forests. When you ask about it, one of the women explains that her grandmother taught her the chant, saying it was once sung to encourage the return of the sun. She adds that some villagers now treat it as harmless tradition, while others feel uneasy mixing old songs with Christian observances. The woman shrugs. She sings because it feels comforting in the cold. The group pauses their music when a man steps forward carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He unwraps it to reveal a crude wooden figure. It is carved with simple lines and shaped like a human silhouette, but its features are deliberately vague. According to oral traditions recorded in certain rural manuscripts, figures like this were sometimes placed in fields or hung near animals to guard against winter misfortune. Whether every village followed this practice is uncertain, but the man explains that his family carves a new figure each year to honor old customs passed down through generations. You thank him and continue your walk. Your path leads into a quiet patch of woodland just beyond the village. Snow blankets the ground so completely that the world feels muffled. Trees arch overhead like ribs of a great beast. Your footsteps sound unnaturally loud on the frozen earth. A cold breeze filters through the branches, making them rattle softly. In the dim light, you understand why winter forests inspired stories. A faint rustle catches your attention. You turn and see a fox dart behind a tree. Its eyes glimmer for a moment before it vanishes. Then you hear a distant hoot of an owl, followed by the slow creaking of branches heavy with snow. Every sound becomes magnified in the hush of evening. You come upon a small clearing where children have built a circle of stones. They rush off laughing as soon as they spot you. When you examine the stones more closely, you notice tiny bundles of dried herbs tucked into the gaps. One of the older villagers approaches and explains that the children created a small winter circle to keep mischief at bay. The bundles contain rosemary, lavender, and a few berries left over from the harvest. She smiles fondly. She tells you it is a harmless game, though based on much older ideas about protecting the home during the longest nights. She adds in a low voice that her grandmother once warned her not to whistle after sunset during the 12 days, because it might invite wandering spirits. The woman shakes her head at the memory and laughs, insisting she never entirely believed the warning. Yet she never whistles at night. Old habits cling to people in ways they seldom admit. The sky grows darker as you leave the clearing. Stars begin to appear in the cold, deep blue above. Your breath fogs the air as you walk back toward the center of the village. Lanterns glow warmly in cottage windows. A dog barks in the distance. The calm of evening settles like a soft blanket. You pass a barn and hear muffled voices inside. Curious, you step closer and peek through a gap in the wooden boards. Several villagers are examining the livestock with unusual concentration. One man whispers that cattle were once believed to kneel at midnight on Christmas Eve, honoring the birth of Christ. He admits that he has never seen it himself, but heard stories from elders who insisted it happened. Whether this belief originated in folk imagination or in scattered observations remains uncertain, yet it persists in many regions. Another villager points to the shadowed rafters and mentions that some people considered barns to be places where good and bad luck intertwined during winter. No one dared to enter alone at night. You feel a faint shiver, unsure whether it comes from the cold or the stories. The villagers notice you and invite you inside. The barn is warmer than you expected. The cows stand quietly, their breath rising in soft plumes. The hay smells sweet and earthy. A lantern glows on a beam overhead. The villagers laugh as they recount tales passed down through generations. Some involve animals speaking at midnight. Others involve spectral visitors. The stories feel playful, yet the listeners cling to them with a solemn kind of delight. You thank them and step back outside. The village now lies wrapped in darkness except for the steady glow of hearths. The air holds a stillness that feels almost sacred. Medieval Christmas did not chase away the mysteries of winter. It coexisted with them, faith layered over older customs, ritual woven into superstition, hope intertwined with fear. You walk slowly toward your resting place, hearing only the soft crunch of snow beneath your feet. The night feels alive with memory, and as you approach the heart of the village again, you sense that tomorrow will draw you deeper into the preparations that transform winter scarcity into a moment of celebration. You wake before the sun has fully climbed above the horizon, the village still wrapped in a soft blue haze that clings to rooftops like faint breath. Frost paints the ground in delicate crystals that crunch beneath your steps as you head toward the cluster of cottages near the center of the settlement. Today marks the true beginning of feast preparations. Even the air feels different, warmer with anticipation even as the cold stings your cheeks. The first sound you hear is the knock of a wooden spoon against a clay bowl. It echoes from a small kitchen where a woman is already mixing dough by lamplight. She works with steady confidence, folding the heavy mixture again and again. According to several descriptions preserved in regional household records, the early hours of feast days always began with bread. You watch as she sprinkles a pinch of dried herbs into the dough. She explains that these came from her small summer garden and must be used sparingly. Bread is one of the few luxuries that can be shaped into something special, even when supplies are lean. You step away from the doorway and follow the smell of smoke drifting through the air. A group of men has gathered around a large outdoor fire. They are turning a spit slowly, heating the surface of a metal pot until it is ready for brewing. One of them waves you closer and offers a friendly greeting. He tells you that they are preparing ale for the Christmas feast. According to well-preserved medieval brewing traditions, winter ale often relied on darker malts and stronger flavours, not only for taste but for preservation in the cold months. Nearby, a young boy carries a bundle of dried barley. He pauses to watch the men stir the pot, fascinated by the rising steam. When you kneel to ask him about his task, he grins shyly and tells you he is helping his father prepare ingredients. He apologizes for the small bundle, explaining that the harvest was unpredictable this year. Yet the family is determined to contribute what they can. The boy then mentions a story he heard from his grandmother about a winter long ago, when villagers flavored their ale with pine needles because they lacked other herbs. The authenticity of that tale might be questionable, but it reveals the creativity born from necessity. You wander deeper into the village and find yourself drawn to a cottage where several women and older children sit around a long wooden table. They are slicing, peeling, and sorting vegetables. Piles of turnips, carrots, and onions line the table like humble jewels of winter survival. The youngest girl grumbles as she tries to peel a particularly stubborn carrot, and one of the older women laughs, handing her a sharper knife. A pot simmers in the hearth, releasing a warm, savoury aroma that fills the room. One of the women gestures for you to taste the broth. You dip a spoon into it and immediately feel heat spread through your chest. She nods with satisfaction, explaining that they are preparing stock to flavour several dishes tomorrow. She points to a basket of dried apples and tells you they will be stewed later. According to accounts in various monastic kitchens, dried fruits were prized ingredients in winter feasts because they reminded people of warmer seasons. In the corner of the room, a man sits carving a series of wooden trenchers. His fingers move with practiced skill. Each trencher will serve as a plate for tomorrow's feast, though their durability depends heavily on how dry the wood has become. He explains that families often reuse trenchers from previous feasts, but some preferred to carve new ones if the old had grown too cracked or worn. He chuckles and adds that certain villages believed fresh trenchers invited good fortune. Whether that belief holds truth is unknown, but the tradition persists here. You continue through the village until you reach a barn open wide to the cold morning air. Inside, a few villagers prepare meat for salting and roasting. The cold helps preserve the freshness, though everyone works quickly to avoid frostbite. A woman carefully rubs salt onto a slab of pork while humming a tune that echoes softly between the beams. She explains that salt is precious, traded from far away, and must be used wisely. A man nearby sharpens a knife, its metallic rasp echoing through the barn. He pauses to tell you about a curious practice recorded in old winter notes. Some villages believed that singing while preparing meat protected it from spoilage. Whether this came from superstition or simply a desire to make tedious work more pleasant, no one fully agrees. The woman humming shrugs with a smile and keeps singing anyway. A group of children arrive carrying baskets filled with dried beans and small bundles of herbs. They deliver them to the adults, and one child proudly announces that her family grew the beans in the small plot behind their cottage. Her mother smiles fondly and tells her she has done well. The sense of collective contribution feels palpable here. Even the smallest hands play a part in shaping the feast. You step outside again and inhale deeply. The village smells of smoke, herbs, and simmering broth. The winter sun finally breaks through the clouds, casting a pale golden glow that softens the frost. You follow the light toward the communal oven at the edge of the settlement. A line has already formed as villagers wait to bake their breads and pies. The oven keeper, a sturdy man with soot-darkened hands, checks each loaf before placing it inside. He ensures the temperature is even, brushing ashes aside with a wooden paddle. One woman stands near the oven with a basket containing a strangely shaped loaf. You ask about it, and she explains that it is her family's special Christmas bread, decorated with a simple design meant to symbolize prosperity. She admits that the tradition is old and that she does not fully understand the symbols herself. Certain festive bread patterns appear across many regions, and scholars often disagree about their origins. Some think they relate to agricultural rites. Others believe they were purely decorative. The woman shrugs and says the bread simply tastes better this way. Farther along, a group of villagers gather around a table covered with small bowls of spices. Cinnamon, if available, is treated like treasure. Cloves, pepper, and ginger appear in tiny amounts, each used sparingly. You watch as a cook pinches a small amount of spice and mixes it into a pot of stewed fruit. She sighs dreamily and says the smell alone reminds her of happier winters. A young man leans against the wall near the spices and tells you about a peculiar belief from his childhood. He recalls being warned never to drop pepper during feast preparations, because doing so would invite quarrels into the household. Whether that warning came from genuine belief or simply from the expense of spices is unclear. You sense both possibilities. You leave the busy cooking area and return to the heart of the village, where a group of older men gather around a low fire. They warm their hands and discuss their memories of past feasts. One says that in his youth, Christmas preparations began even earlier. Another argues that traditions shift with time, and that not every practice remains consistent. Their conversation twists between nostalgia and gentle disagreement. They gesture with their cups of ale, sharing stories of years when the feast was sparse or unexpectedly abundant. One elder mentions an unusual winter when an unexpected thaw caused stored meats to spoil, forcing the entire village to improvise a feast out of root vegetables and fish. He laughs as he recalls how surprisingly well the meal turned out. Another elder shakes his head and counters that his favorite feast involved a traveling cook who introduced new spices to the village. According to him, no feast has tasted quite as marvelous since. The two men banter with warmth and familiarity. As the sun climbs higher, the pace quickens. You wander from cottage to cottage, witnessing the rhythm of preparation. Hands knead dough, knives chop vegetables, fires roar into life. Voices rise and fall in a steady cadence. Even the animals seem aware of the heightened activity. Chickens flap excitedly. Dogs circle in search of scraps. A cow lows softly, stirring straw as though sensing something festive in the air. You pause near the village green and watch as a small group of teenagers test the strength of a wooden table meant for tomorrow's communal meal. They shake it and lean on it, laughing when one of the legs wobbles. They adjust it with determination, hammering wedges of wood beneath the uneven corner until it stands firm. You sense their pride. They will sit here tomorrow with friends and family, sharing whatever food the village has managed to assemble. The air feels thicker with purpose now. Every cottage, every fire pit, every corner of the village pulses with preparations. Winter may be harsh, but the people here create warmth with their hands, their voices, and their willingness to share. You take a final slow breath of the fragrant air and step back toward the main path. The feast will come soon, shaped by all these efforts, and as you move quietly through the village, you feel the next part of this journey calling you toward the music already beginning to stir near the edge of twilight. You follow a trail of footprints leading toward the far edge of the village, where the cottages thin out and the fields open into a wide sweep of frozen ground. The air carries a subtle vibration, faint but unmistakable, as if someone is nudging the stillness with sound. You slow your steps, listening more closely. There it is again, a soft trill, a low hum, a rhythmic tapping. Music is waking up before the feast itself, slipping into the winter air like the first warm breath of celebration. As you near a small barn, the sounds grow clearer. You push open the door and find several villagers gathered inside, instruments resting across their laps. The space smells of straw, damp wool, and the faint tang of cold iron. A few lanterns hang from the beams, casting gentle circles of light. The musicians glance up with friendly smiles and nod for you to come closer. One of them, an older man with a weathered face and nimble fingers, plucks the strings of a lute to test the tuning. He winces slightly and makes a small adjustment. According to commonly cited musical manuscripts from the period, Medieval musicians tuned their instruments by ear, relying on memory, instinct, and the acoustics of the room. The man tells you that the cold makes the strings tighten unpredictably. He warms his hands by a small brazier before strumming again. This time, the note resonates like an amber drop in the air. Nearby, a young woman holds a shawm, its wooden body polished to a soft glow. She practices a short melody, the piercing tone filling the barn with confident clarity. She pauses between phrases to adjust her embouchure, blowing gently into the reed. She explains that she learned the instrument from her uncle, who taught her winter songs passed down through generations. Some of the tunes have Christian origins, while others feel older, shaped by farmland rhythms and seasonal ceremonies. Researchers who study early European music often note the unpredictable blend of sacred and secular influences, and the villagers seem perfectly comfortable letting the two mingle. A boy sits cross-legged on a pile of hay, tapping a frame drum with quick, playful rhythms. The sound is soft but spirited. He tells you proudly that he is practicing for tomorrow night, when the musicians will perform in the hall after the feast. His mother, standing beside him, smiles and adds that he began drumming on pots when he was barely old enough to walk. She says she once hid her cooking bowls to preserve their shape. The boy overhears and laughs, insisting that he never damaged a single one. She rolls her eyes fondly. You settle onto an overturned crate as the musicians begin to rehearse together. The first notes are tentative, like footsteps testing ice, but the melody soon finds its balance. A shawm guides the tune while the drum keeps a gentle pulse. The lute fills the spaces between, weaving warm chords into the air. The music transforms the barn into something larger, something glowing with shared intention. The players stop occasionally to adjust their rhythm or debate the next phrase. One musician suggests adding a brief pause between two sections. Another argues for a faster tempo. Their discussion drifts into friendly disagreement, highlighting how medieval music lacked the strict notation systems familiar today. Many performers relied on memory and improvisation. Even well-preserved chant books provide only fragments, leaving much to interpretation. No wonder modern scholars cannot fully reconstruct how all these pieces were performed. The villagers, however, seem perfectly content trusting their instincts. You move toward the far wall where several handmade instruments rest on a wooden shelf. A simple reed pipe lies beside a harp with missing strings. A small bell rests next to a carved wooden rattle filled with pebbles. A musician notices your interest and explains that some instruments are played only during the 12 days, because their sounds were once believed to chase away winter mischief. Whether or not this custom traces accurately across regions remains uncertain, but the idea clearly matters here. The musician picks up the small bell and lets it ring softly. Its tone is bright and delicate. He tells you his grandmother used to ring a similar bell when preparing for Christmas Eve, claiming it kept the house cheerful. You smile at the image, imagining a cozy cottage filled with ringing and laughter. The practice session continues while villagers trickle in to listen. A shepherd leans on his crook, nodding along to the rhythm. A pair of children sway with the melody. A baker arrives with a basket of warm rolls, offering them to the musicians in exchange for a preview of their performance. They accept happily, and soon the barn fills with the smell of fresh bread mingling with the sound of lively music. A few villagers begin humming along, their voices blending into a soft harmony. One woman sings a short verse in a dialect that carries a lilting, almost playful cadence. She explains afterward that it is a regional carol her mother used to sing. The lyrics describe the return of warmth after winter, though in symbolic terms that hint at both Christian and older seasonal imagery. The overlap reflects the blending of traditions during this period, a phenomenon that leaves historians debating where one custom ends and another begins. The musicians take a short break. You wander outside into the cold, letting the music echo faintly behind you. The fresh air carries whispers of the melody, and the sky has shifted into a clearer shade of blue. You walk along the path and spot two men lifting a heavy drum into a cart. They greet you and explain that they are delivering it to the manor for the main festivities. They mention an amusing detail drawn from their own local lore. The drummer once fell asleep during a performance years ago, right in the middle of a solemn piece. The entire hall laughed about it for weeks. Stories like these travel far in small communities. You return to the barn just as the musicians begin another piece. This one is slow and contemplative, shaped by long notes and gentle harmonies. It feels like a winter evening distilled into sound. The shawm leads with a mournful tone. The lute provides warmth beneath it, and the drum barely taps at all, leaving space for the melody to breathe. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine how this music might feel inside the candlelit hall tomorrow night, echoing through beams and rafters. As the piece ends, the musicians exchange glances of approval. Their preparations are nearly complete. The barn glows with quiet satisfaction, as if the music itself has warmed the air. You step outside again, walking slowly toward the center of the village. The sound of music lingers behind you like a comforting shadow. The day continues to unfold, and with each step you sense the feast drawing nearer. The next transformation lies just ahead, waiting in the great hall where greenery, candles, and rich aromas will soon reshape rough timber walls into something wondrous. You walk slowly toward the manor again, as the afternoon deepens into a warm amber glow. The snow on the ground glistens faintly, and your breath floats like pale smoke around your face. The air holds a sense of expectancy. Something is shifting inside the great hall. Even from a distance, you can see villagers moving in and out of the doors with bundles of greenery, armloads of candles, and baskets filled with cloths. Today is the moment when rough timber walls begin their transformation into a place worthy of Christmas. As you step into the courtyard, the sound of steady work greets you. Laughter, conversation, and the dull thud of wooden mallets blend together in a comforting rhythm. You cross the threshold and feel an immediate change. The hall is no longer dim and empty. It is alive with colour and motion. Sprigs of holly hang from beams, ivy wraps around pillars, and fresh branches of fir have been arranged along the walls. According to widely circulated descriptions of medieval festive customs, winter greenery symbolized endurance, reminding everyone that life held firm even in the darkest months. The hall feels warmer simply from the presence of so much living colour. Servants bustle everywhere. One carries a bucket of warm water to wipe the tables. Another carefully unrolls a long woven cloth, smoothing its wrinkles with patient hands. Several villagers arrange candles along the high table, testing their placement so that light will fall just right when the feast begins. You watch as they measure the distance between each candle with their fingers. Precision matters, not for luxury but for safety. A poorly placed candle could spell disaster in a timber hall. A man climbs a ladder to hang a garland high above your head. He pauses halfway up to rest, blowing into his hands to warm them. He explains that the garland must be placed firmly enough to withstand drafts from the open doors. He mentions that one year a garland fell onto a platter of roasted meat during the feast, causing an uproar. Whether the story has grown exaggerated over time is unclear, but his grin suggests a fond memory rather than a true catastrophe. You move toward the center of the hall where the hearth blazes with new vigor. Its flames crackle and snap, filling the room with a comforting heat. Smoke curls upward into the rafters, leaving traces of warmth on the cold beams. A woman stands nearby, stirring a cauldron of spiced wine. The aroma drifts through the hall, rich with hints of honey and herbs. She offers you a small ladleful to warm your hands. You sip it slowly, feeling the heat spread through your chest. She explains that the recipe comes from a tradition her mother learned at a distant manor. Some regions sweeten their wine more than others. Some add fruit. Others prefer bitter herbs. Researchers studying medieval culinary patterns often remark on how widely flavors varied from village to village. You wander toward the high table where a steward oversees the arrangements with a critical eye. He adjusts the placement of each goblet and inspects every plate. When he notices your presence, he offers a polite nod. He tells you that a well-prepared hall is as essential to the feast as the food itself. He recalls a passage from an old household manual describing how order and beauty invited blessings into a home. Whether or not the text represented widespread practice remains uncertain, but the sentiment clearly resonates with him. He then gestures toward the narrow windows where thin panes made from polished horn filter the winter light. The glow that enters through them feels soft and golden, giving the hall an almost dreamlike atmosphere. The steward explains that these windows were polished earlier in the day, a task requiring sand, oil, and a surprising amount of patience. He notes that light plays an important part in Christmas celebrations, symbolizing hope in the darkest season. You feel the truth of this as you watch the afternoon sun illuminate the greenery. A young girl works diligently at one of the tables, arranging small bowls of salt and herbs. She hums a tune as she moves. Her mother checks her work and smiles with pride. The girl explains to you that certain herbs placed on the table help keep food fresh. She adds a mischievous detail, claiming that if someone accidentally spills salt during the feast, they must give a small gift to the person sitting beside them. She admits the rule might be more playful than ancient, but traditions evolve with each generation. Nearby, a pair of men carry a large tapestry between them. They stretch it across the back wall with careful hands. The image woven into it depicts a winter landscape dotted with trees and animals. The colors are muted yet beautiful, fading unevenly with age. One man tells you the tapestry only hangs during the Christmas season. Its presence honors a past lord who once brought it from a distant town. Whether the story is fully accurate or embellished, you sense the pride in their voices. The musicians you visited earlier begin arriving with their instruments. They place themselves along one wall to test the acoustics. The shawm calls out a clear, bright note that echoes pleasingly. The lute responds with a warm chord. A boy taps his drum softly, gauging how the sound carries across the hall. The musicians nod in approval, adjusting their positions for the best effect. Their presence adds a spark of excitement, as if the hall itself is preparing to breathe music. You step aside as a woman hurries past with a tray of polished cups. She sets them near the hearth to warm slightly, explaining that cold cups dampen the taste of ale. You would never have thought of such a detail, yet it reveals the care woven into every corner of this event. She mentions that an old story claims warm ale grants good fortune for the coming year. Few take the tale literally, yet everyone appreciates a drink that does not numb the tongue. In the far corner, a group of children gather around a basket of candles. Their job is to test which ones burn evenly. They light each candle, watching to see how the flame behaves. One candle flickers wildly, and the children giggle before setting it aside. Another burns straight and strong, earning the quiet approval of the oldest child. The little rituals of preparation carry a sense of reverence disguised as play. The hall continues to change around you. Tables gleam beneath freshly polished wood. Benches stand in neat rows. Greenery sways gently whenever someone passes, releasing small bursts of fragrance into the air. The servants, who earlier moved with cautious reverence, now walk with a sense of growing pride. The transformation feels nearly complete. You wander toward the door for a final look. From the threshold, the great hall glows with life. Shadows dance across the walls. Candles flicker in clusters, their light shifting across branches of holly and ivy. The decorations soften the harsh lines of timber and stone, turning the space into something far more inviting than its usual utilitarian form. You step outside, letting the cold settle on your cheeks again. Behind you, the hall radiates warmth through the wooden doors, promising laughter, stories, and music. The feast draws closer with each passing moment. The village holds its breath in anticipation. You walk away from the manor, feeling the glow behind you like a gentle push. The next part of the night will carry the weight of expectation, the hush before celebration, and soon, Christmas Eve will begin. You walk slowly back toward the village as the last colours of afternoon drain from the sky. A deep blue settles over the rooftops, and the first hints of Christmas Eve hush begin drifting through the lanes. The air feels sharper now, as if the cold has been waiting for this moment to assert itself more boldly. You pull your cloak closer and listen. The usual sounds of the day have softened. No hammers, no bustling kitchen noise, no shouts across the green. Instead, the village holds a quiet tension, a stillness shaped by anticipation and a touch of reverence. Candles flicker behind shutter slats, small points of gold in the thickening dusk. A few villagers step outside to fetch firewood or water, but they move gently, speaking in low voices. According to several parish customs, noted across different regions, Christmas Eve carried a sense of sacred pause. People tried not to quarrel or speak harshly, believing that harmony on this night invited blessing for the year ahead. Whether this belief was entirely widespread remains uncertain, yet the hush surrounding you feels genuine. You pass a cottage where a woman gently shakes snow from a small bundle of straw. She spreads it beneath the threshold with deliberate care. When you ask about it, she smiles softly and explains that the straw symbolizes the manger. Some families place it by the door, others beneath the table, each following traditions passed down quietly from mothers and grandmothers. She adds that the placement changes from region to region and that old stories offer differing interpretations. Her explanation suggests layers of meaning woven through centuries of winter nights. Inside her cottage, a child peers out at you. His eyes are wide with excitement, though he tries to appear solemn because his mother told him Christmas Eve demands good behavior. He holds a small candle in his hands but has not been allowed to light it yet. The glow from the hearth paints warm colors on his face. You smile at him, and he ducks behind the doorframe, giggling quietly. Further along, you see a group of older villagers gathered near the church path. They speak in subdued tones about the timing of midnight service. One mentions that the priest hopes to begin earlier this year to avoid the bitterest hours of cold. Another reminds the group that tradition says the service must begin at a precise moment. They debate gently, each appealing to different memories. Their exchange reveals how local traditions often shift slightly over time, shaped by practicality and the resilience of community. You walk past the green, noticing how the world seems coated in silver. Frost clings to every branch, every rooftop, every fence post. The moon rises slowly above the trees, a clean white disk that throws a soft glow across the village. The scene feels almost otherworldly. Winter nights can make even familiar places feel touched by mystery. A woman steps outside carrying a bowl covered with cloth. She sets it on a small table near the door and lifts the cloth to check its contents. Warm steam rises, carrying the scent of herbs. She tells you that the dish inside must rest before being served tomorrow. She smiles when she sees your curiosity and explains a small custom from her childhood. According to her grandmother, no one should taste the special Christmas dishes before the first church bell rings on Christmas morning. She admits she does not fully know why. She just follows the tradition because it feels right. Nearby, a young couple places candles along their windowsill. The flames quiver in the cold air. The man explains that in some regions, villagers believed that Christmas Eve light-guided wandering travelers, both living and departed. Whether the belief sprang from faith or storytelling is hard to say. The couple, however, lights their candles each year without question. Their gentle smiles suggest they find comfort in the glow. A dog trots past you, tail wagging slowly, its paws leaving delicate prints in the snow. It sniffs at a pile of firewood before settling beneath a porch where warmth leaks through the planks. Even animals seem calmer tonight, as though aware of the change in atmosphere. You turn down a narrow lane where a family gathers outside with a small lantern. They wait for a relative who must make the final walk from a nearby hamlet before night falls. You join them for a moment, sharing the quiet expectancy. The father explains that relatives often travelled short distances on Christmas Eve, hoping to arrive in time for the vigil service. He mentions hearing conflicting stories about whether such visits were encouraged or discouraged in earlier centuries. He shrugs, saying families have always done what mattered to them. A soft wind rises, carrying the distant scent of pine. You hear a faint bell in the far distance, not from the church, but from somewhere near the fields. A shepherd moves slowly toward the village with his flock, leading them into the shelter of a barn. Their soft bleats sound almost musical in the quiet night. The shepherd nods to you as he passes, explaining that on nights like this he never leaves his animals untended. His voice carries a gentle certainty, shaped by years of winter labor. As you approach the church path, you notice villagers placing small candles along the way. Each flame trembles as the cold settles heavier. The path glows faintly, like a trail of stars guiding travelers upward. You imagine walking this path at midnight, surrounded by villagers moving in silence. The imagery feels almost dreamlike. A young girl kneels by the church fence, tying a sprig of ivy to it. She explains that the greenery symbolizes hope for the coming year. She adds a small detail she learned from her grandmother, claiming that ivy represents resilience because it clings to stone even in winter. You sense an older story beneath her words, perhaps a folk meaning that predates the church itself. A few steps away, the priest emerges from the church door carrying a lantern. He checks the decorations placed earlier, gently straightening a candle that leans slightly to one side. He pauses to greet you and says that Christmas Eve has always been his favorite night, not because of the ceremony, but because of the shared calm before it. He recalls an old passage he once read, suggesting that people in earlier centuries believed heaven drew nearer to earth on this night. He adds, with a smile, that such ideas comfort people, though it is difficult to confirm how widely they were believed. He lifts the lantern and walks slowly along the path, ensuring nothing has been overlooked. You step inside the church briefly, drawn by its quiet glow. The interior feels transformed from earlier. More candles now flicker along the edges, illuminating the greenery draped across the walls. Shadows sway gently on the stone floor. A few villagers kneel in silence, their breaths visible in the cold. The moment feels suspended, as if time itself has slowed. You leave the church again, letting the cold settle once more on your cheeks. The entire village appears wrapped in stillness. A few last tasks are completed. A window is shut, a candle is straightened, a child is ushered indoors, and gradually the village settles into a deep, hushed waiting. You walk toward your resting place with slow steps. The moon shines bright, the snow sparkles beneath it, and the air holds a silence that feels almost sacred. Christmas Eve lies fully upon the village now, quiet and expectant, its weight carried in every lantern, every whisper, every careful gesture. Soon the bells will call everyone into the night, but for now, the hush remains. You make your way up the church path again, when the first soft bell begins to ring across the snow-covered village. Its sound is gentle at first, almost hesitant, as though the bell itself is waking from a long winter rest. Then it grows clearer, spreading through the stillness with a calm authority that draws people from their homes. The night air feels sharper now, but strangely alive. This is the moment everyone has been preparing for. Midnight Mass, the quiet heart of Christmas Eve. Lanterns appear one by one along the lane as families step out into the cold. Their bundled shapes glow softly, each lantern throwing a small circle of gold onto the snow. You join the slow procession climbing the path. No one hurries, no one speaks loudly. The sound of footsteps in the snow becomes its own quiet rhythm. According to several often cited descriptions of medieval worship, the walk to midnight mass was considered part of the ritual itself, a transition from ordinary time into sacred time. You reach the church steps just as the doors open wide. A warm glow spills out, inviting the villagers inside. You step through the doorway and feel yourself enveloped by the sense of beeswax, greenery, and faint incense. The church looks transformed. Candles line the walls, each flame steady and bright. The greenery arranged earlier now glimmers softly in the candlelight. Shadows play along the rafters, rising and falling like gentle waves. A hush fills the space as people take their places on wooden benches. Children sit close to their parents. Elderly villagers settle near the front, wrapped in thick cloaks. The sound of rustling fabric and muffled breathing fills the room. The priest stands near the altar with a serene expression, the lantern he carried earlier now resting beside him. He pauses for a moment, letting the congregation settle, then begins a soft chant. The first notes echo through the church. They rise slowly, like breath shaping itself into melody. The choir joins in with voices shaped by countless winter nights of practice. The harmonies blend into something warm and resonant. The chant fills every corner of the church, gathering around candles, lingering in the rafters, and settling gently against the stone floor. Some music historians note that such chants varied greatly from one region to another, influenced by local tradition and the memory of those who taught them. You sit quietly, absorbing the deep calm that settles over the congregation. A woman beside you clasps her hands together, her breath rising slowly with each quiet prayer. A child leans against his father's shoulder, half awake but determined to stay conscious for the sacred moment. The rhythm of the chant continues, soothing and steady. The priest begins the reading for the night. His voice is low but clear, shaped by years of speaking in cold churches where each word must carry through stone walls. You listen to the familiar story, noticing how the villagers respond to it with subtle bows of the head or soft murmurs of agreement. The story feels ancient here, older than parchment, older than stone, older even than the village itself. It feels woven into the very structure of winter. Candles flicker gently as the priest lifts the chalice. The congregation leans forward slightly, as if drawn together by an invisible thread. A wave of reverence settles over the room. You notice how even the smallest children fall silent now. A quiet stillness fills the air, so complete you can hear the faint crackle of a candle on the far wall. As the service continues, a soft draught moves through the church, carrying the cool scent of night. You lift your eyes to the higher rafters and notice a tiny beam of moonlight slipping through a narrow window slit. The contrast between candlelight and moonlight gives the church an almost otherworldly quality. Some villagers glance upward too, exchanging small smiles. Whether they see symbolism in the moment or simply appreciate the beauty, you cannot tell. A young acolyte carries a small censer down the aisle. The smoke drifts upward in thin ribbons, curling like pale vines through the air. The scent settles gently over the congregation. You breathe it in, feeling the warmth of the moment spread through your chest. A few villagers begin softly humming along with the next chant. Others close their eyes in silent reflection. This is not just a ritual. It is a moment of shared endurance, a quiet understanding that the hardest part of winter still lies ahead, yet hope must continue to flicker like these candles. Some oral traditions mention that families once believed prayers said at midnight mass carried special weight, though whether this belief held consistently across regions remains a point of debate. You notice an elderly man near the front wiping his eyes discreetly. A woman beside him rests a gentle hand on his arm. The tenderness of the gesture speaks louder than any words. Moments like these remind you that medieval Christmas was as much about human connection as it was about ceremony. The priest raises his hands and begins the most solemn portion of the service. The choir responds with a song that trembles with emotion. The melody shifts into a higher register, weaving through the air like thread pulled through cloth. The candles glow brighter as the song rises. A deep quiet fills your chest, the kind that makes the world seem to pause. Then comes a moment of silence, pure, unbroken, absolute. The entire congregation holds its breath. Even the flames seem to stand still. You feel the weight of centuries pressing gently around you, as though countless winter nights from long ago echo softly in this single pause. The final blessing breaks the silence. The congregation responds in a low murmur that rolls gently across the room. People slowly rise from their benches. Some bow their heads once more. Others clasp hands or exchange quiet smiles. The priest extinguishes a single candle on the altar, leaving the others to glow for a little while longer. You step outside into the cold night. The moon shines brightly overhead, painting the snow with pale silver. The villagers walk down the path in small groups, their lanterns swaying softly. No one speaks loudly. Words feel unnecessary. The air holds too much meaning for noise. You walk with them for a while, feeling the peace of the moment settle into your bones. Midnight Mass has ended, yet its gentle calm continues to echo in every heartbeat, every breath, every footstep. Tonight, the village sleeps with hope. You step out into the night and walk slowly down the church path, following the faint glow of lanterns as they drift back toward the village. By the time you reach the first cottage, most families have already slipped indoors, eager for warmth after the long service. The air feels softer now, less tense than earlier, as if the village has released the breath it had been holding all evening. Midnight has passed. It is Christmas morning. You feel the subtle change almost immediately. The cold is still sharp, but something warm lingers beneath it, a quiet spark left behind by candlelight and song. You pause in the center of the lane, letting the hush wrap around you like a thick wool blanket. A few stars shimmer overhead between patches of faint cloud. The moon hangs lower now, casting a pale glow across the rooftops. The first sign of awakening comes from a cottage nearby where a faint clatter breaks the silence. You move closer and hear a woman's voice humming a gentle tune. According to several well-preserved church diaries, families often rose early on Christmas morning, eager to begin the day with small rituals, even if sleep had been brief. The woman opens her door a crack to shake out a bundle of cloths. Steam escapes from the cottage, carrying the scent of warm bread. She notices you and offers a smile, explaining that she wants her household ready before visitors arrive later. You continue along the lane, noticing how frost glitters on every surface. The cold feels deeper now, the kind that sinks into your bones if you remain still for too long. A rooster crows somewhere, sounding half confused and half triumphant. Chickens shift inside their coop, rustling straw as they sense the morning. A dog trots past you, tail wagging with sleepy enthusiasm. He stops to sniff the air, then trots toward a cottage door where someone is already stirring the hearth back to life. Through the window you see firelight begin to bloom, throwing flickers of yellow across the frost. As you walk farther into the village, more cottages begin to show signs of life. A child opens a window shutter wide enough to peer out. Her cheeks are flushed from the warmth inside. She waves, then quickly retreats before the cold can chase her fingers numb. You hear her excited voice muffled through the wood, calling for her parents to hurry. At the next house, a man steps out to gather wood. He rubs his hands together and breathes into them before lifting the logs. When he spots you, he nods warmly. He tells you that Christmas morning calls for a strong fire and a warm breakfast. According to various accounts of rural winter life, households placed great emphasis on keeping the hearth burning brightly on Christmas Day, believing that warmth and flame symbolized blessing. The man gestures toward the sky, remarking that the clouds look promising for clear weather. He adds a small detail from his childhood, saying his mother believed that a bright Christmas sky heralded a good spring. Whether that idea comes from superstition or seasonal observation is uncertain, but he repeats it fondly. You follow your path until the lane opens slightly wider. Here, two families stand outside exchanging greetings. They laugh gently, their voices soft to keep the peace of the morning. One woman carries a tray covered with cloth. She lifts a corner to show you a loaf decorated with small cuts along the top. She explains that the family saved this loaf specifically for Christmas breakfast. She learned the pattern from her grandmother, who believed the cuts encouraged luck to enter the bread as it baked. Whether that belief holds true or is simply a sweet family tradition, she does not say. A young boy joins the group and carefully holds up a small wooden toy horse. It is newly carved, the edges still smooth. He beams with pride as he explains that it was a gift from his older brother. The simplicity of the toy reveals much about medieval Christmas. Gifts were modest, often handcrafted, and carried meaning rather than extravagance. You admire the little horse and the boy's glowing expression before moving on. You take a slow turn toward the village green. The snow crunches under your feet in crisp, satisfying layers. The green itself lies quiet, but traces of footsteps crisscross its surface. A few people walk along the edge, careful not to disturb the stillness too much. Their breath hangs visibly in the air, forming tiny clouds that dissolve in the breeze. At the far end of the green, a woman places a small candle at the base of the communal well. She explains when you approach that her family has always lit a candle near water on Christmas morning. She says her mother believed water holds a special stillness on this day. Certain sources from various regions mention similar beliefs, though they often vary widely. Whether rooted in pagan tradition or Christian symbolism, the custom persists in quiet corners of rural life. The village feels peaceful, yet energetic. You notice that people move with a lightness in their steps, as though the weight of winter has temporarily lifted. Children dart between cottages, their laughter bubbling softly in the cold air. A few carry small baskets, perhaps already preparing to deliver small gifts to neighbours. You walk toward a cottage where voices rise in melodic harmony. The door stands open, and as you peer inside, you see a family singing softly around the hearth. Their harmony is imperfect but sincere, weaving through the air like a warm ribbon. The grandmother leads the song, tapping her foot in gentle rhythm. According to certain musical traditions preserved in local lore, families often sang familiar carols or winter songs together on Christmas morning. The melody carries simplicity and comfort. You remain at the doorway for a moment, absorbing the gentle music, before moving on. Outside, the sky brightens even more, casting a faint gold shimmer across the snow. You inhale deeply. The scent of wood smoke mixes with faint hints of herbs and baking bread. The combination feels like winter distilled to its essence. A man and his daughter appear carrying a small basket of apples that were carefully stored through the season. The apples are wrinkled but fragrant. They offer one to you, explaining that sharing fruit on Christmas morning symbolizes generosity and hope for abundance. You take a bite. The apple is crisp, sweet, and unexpectedly refreshing. The man's daughter giggles at your expression. At the village edge, you find a shepherd returning from checking on his animals. He leans on his staff and mentions that the flock behaved unusually quietly during the night. He smiles knowingly and quotes an old saying about animals sensing the peace of Christmas. Whether such sayings hold truth or simply comfort people, he does not seem bothered by the uncertainty. You walk back toward the heart of the village, noting how warmth has begun to seep from every doorway. Families prepare to gather, whether in homes or at the manor, carrying with them the calm born of a long night and a hopeful morning. The village feels almost changed from the one you first encountered. The tension has eased. The heaviness of winter seems more distant, replaced by a gentle glow. You pause on a small rise where the snow glimmers beneath the rising light. The view reveals the entire village, its thatched roofs dusted with frost, its chimneys puffing steady smoke, its people moving with quiet joy. This is Christmas morning in a medieval world. Not grand or extravagant, but beautiful in its simplicity and sincerity. And as you step forward again, you sense that the day's true celebrations are only beginning. You follow the gentle flow of villagers as they move from household to household, carrying small bundles wrapped in cloth or tucked carefully beneath cloaks. The morning light has brightened into a pale gold that settles softly across the snow. Christmas Day has fully arrived, and with it the tradition of exchanging modest gifts. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasteful. Just tokens, meant to strengthen bonds within the community. You pause beside a cottage where a woman is tying a thin strip of dyed wool around a small clay cup. She notices you watching and explains that the cup is a gift for her neighbour, who helped repair her roof after an early winter storm. She brushes a thumb across the cup's surface, smoothing a tiny crack that had been sealed with resin. She says that in her childhood, gifts like this were usually handmade, each carrying a story of effort rather than cost. According to several household traditions recorded across rural regions, such items were cherished precisely because they were crafted by the giver's own hands. As you move on, you notice two children trading simple trinkets. One gives a tiny whistle carved from elder wood. The other offers a string of dried berries tied together with twine. Their excitement feels unrestrained, as though these treasures were priceless artifacts. They blow the whistle and laugh as its sharp tone pierces the cold air. The girl wearing the berry necklace twirls proudly, letting it bounce against her tunic. Nearby, an older man stands behind his cottage door, holding a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside is a piece of carefully polished bone shaped into a button. He explains that he carved it during long winter evenings. He gives it to his daughter, who fastens it to her cloak with tears in her eyes. The gesture speaks of family ties, maintained through effort rather than wealth. He tells you that in his youth, buttons were valuable enough to be gifted for special occasions. Whether that was common across all regions is uncertain, though similar accounts appear in old inventories and wills. You continue walking and spot a few villagers gathered in a circle around a small table. On it sit modest items: a woolen glove, a carved wooden spoon, a sprig of dried herbs tied neatly with a ribbon. Each villager approaches the table to exchange something with a neighbour. The process resembles a slow, almost ceremonial dance. One woman trades an embroidered pouch for a small candle. A man gives a handful of dried nuts in return for a wheat straw ornament. The scene reflects an unwritten agreement that gifts should be humble, thoughtful, and rooted in everyday usefulness. As you wander toward the next lane, a young woman beckons you into her home. Inside, she shows you a simple wreath made from twigs and winter flowers. It is fragile but elegant. She plans to offer it to the grandmother who lives 2 cottages away. She reveals in a quiet voice that her grandmother once taught her how to weave such wreaths during long winters. Whether the ritual carries a deeper symbolic meaning or is simply a tradition of their family, she cannot say. She only knows it brings comfort. Back outside, you pass 2 teenage boys struggling to hold a bundle wrapped in cloth. They unwrap it slightly to reveal a pair of leather braces. The older boy explains that he made them for his younger brother to use while tending sheep. The younger boy beams, flexing his wrists proudly. His brother ruffles his hair and tells him to keep them in good condition. The moment feels honest and warm. You step toward the village green, where a group of elderly women sit together near a bench covered in blankets. Each holds a tiny gift ready to be given later. One has knitted a pair of mittens. Another has prepared a small packet of dried lavender. The third holds a wooden thimble carved with surprising finesse. They remind you gently that giving on Christmas Day is not measured by value but by intention. You nod, appreciating their wisdom. A man approaches carrying a small loaf of sweetened bread. He presents it to a neighbour with a warm handshake. The neighbour thanks him and offers in return a jar of honey saved from summer. The exchange feels ancient, grounded in shared labour and mutual survival. According to some regional customs that appear in older winter records, food gifts symbolize both generosity and trust. You sense that meaning clearly here. A group of children race past you, each clutching a small token. You follow them to a cottage where an elderly couple waits by the door. The children present their gifts: a painted pebble, a tiny doll made from corn husks, a ribbon, and a small clay bead. The couple smiles broadly, accepting each one as though it were precious. In return, they hand out thin wafers flavored with honey. This exchange, you realize, is perhaps the purest form of celebration. You walk toward a cottage where laughter spills from the doorway. Inside, a young couple presents each other with small embroidered patches, each stitched with a symbol meaningful to their life together. She has sewn a tiny sprig of ivy to represent steadfastness. He has sewn a star to represent hope. Whether the meanings of these symbols stem from folklore or personal sentiment, the affection in their exchange is unmistakable. Outside, you encounter a man carrying a small wooden tool he crafted for a friend, meant to ease the work of splitting firewood. He hands it over with a grin. The friend tests the tool's weight and nods in appreciation. A practical gift, born of understanding the cold season's demands. You overhear one of them say that such gifts can mark the difference between hardship and ease during winter. This sentiment appears often in rural recollections of the period. You continue walking until you come across a small child holding a handful of feathers tied together with coloured thread. She tells you it is a charm meant to bring happiness. She gives it shyly to her grandmother, who pretends to be astonished and delighted. The grandmother places it above the doorway, promising to keep it safe. You smile at the sweetness of the exchange. Farther along, a pair of neighbours trade cheese for a small sack of dried herbs. Their conversation turns to memories of past winters, each remembering times when gifts were even smaller yet felt equally meaningful. They laugh about the year one neighbour gave the other a single onion, and how it started a playful tradition of exchanging humble but heartfelt tokens. As the morning brightens further, the village becomes a tapestry of small gestures. Children run happily from cottage to cottage. Adults greet one another with warm smiles, offering small presents that reflect effort rather than abundance. The air fills with the hum of gentle voices, the scent of freshly baked bread, and the faint smoke from quiet hearths. You pause near the centre of the village, feeling the peaceful rhythm of the morning settle into your bones. Christmas in this world does not revolve around lavish offerings or grand spectacles. It thrives in these tiny exchanges, each one carrying a sense of belonging, gratitude, and hope. Even the cold feels less biting now, softened by warmth that radiates from human connection. You take one more slow breath before turning toward the manor, where preparations for the midday feast are reaching their peak. The morning has offered its gentle gifts. Now the heartier celebrations wait just ahead. You walk toward the manor again, guided by the steady stream of villagers carrying baskets, clay jugs, wrapped loaves, and bundles of greenery that sway gently as they move. The sun has climbed higher now, though it shines with the weak glow of winter, more silver than gold. The cold still presses at your cheeks, but the warmth of anticipation fills the air like an invisible hearth. The feast is close. You can almost smell it before you reach the courtyard. As you approach the great hall, the heavy doors stand wide open, and a rich wave of aromas rushes out to greet you. Roasting meat, spiced broth, warm bread, sweetened fruit simmering in clay pots. The scents blend into something comforting and almost intoxicating. A servant carrying a platter hurries past you, offering a quick nod before disappearing inside. According to several well-regarded household accounts from winter celebrations, this moment, just before noon, marked the height of festive preparation, when every hand was needed. Inside the hall, the space looks entirely transformed from the day before. Candles glow brightly along the walls, casting warm light over the greenery. The long tables gleam with polished wood. Earthenware cups line the edges, each one waiting to be filled. The high table, draped in a woven cloth of deep red, stands ready for the Lord and his closest guests. You walk slowly between the tables, absorbing the shifting atmosphere. The hall seems to breathe differently now, as though the firelight itself has a pulse. In the far corner, a cook stands before a large wooden board, carving slices from a roasted boar. The meat glistens beneath the blade. He wipes his brow and grins when he notices you watching. He explains that this year's boar was smaller than last year's, but he has prepared it with extra herbs to make up for size. He gestures to a small bundle of rosemary tied to his belt. He mentions that rosemary was believed in some regions to strengthen the heart during winter feasts. Whether that belief holds any scientific truth is uncertain, but he likes the story. Nearby, several women stir a massive cauldron filled with stewed apples and cloves. The fragrance drifts through the hall like a warm blanket. One woman offers you a small taste on the end of her spoon. The flavour is both sweet and earthy, a reminder of summer stored carefully through the cold months. She tells you that her grandmother once claimed cloves were strong enough to ward away mischief during winter gatherings. Whether she believed this literally or simply enjoyed the idea remains unclear, but the tradition continues here. At another table, children arrange loaves of bread in neat rows. Some loaves have small patterns cut into them. Others carry tiny symbols pressed into the dough before baking. A boy proudly shows you a loaf marked with a little sun shape. He says his older sister taught him the design. She believes it brings brightness to the feast. The boy shrugs and says he mostly likes the way it looks. Customs survive for many reasons, and practicality is only one of them. A pair of young men haul in a cauldron containing stewed venison. Steam pours out with each step they take, clouding the air around them. They set it down near the hearth, their faces flushed from effort. One of them laughs as he recalls a feast from his childhood when the stew was too thin. His mother added bread pieces to thicken it, and it became so hearty that neighbours talked about it for weeks. Stories like this, passed through families, shape how each generation approaches festival cooking. You wander closer to the musicians preparing their instruments along the wall. They tune their lute, test the shawm, and tap the drum with careful precision. The lute player plucks a few bright notes, then adjusts a string that has tightened unevenly from the cold. The shawm player warms her reed between her palms, bringing it closer to the fire for a moment. The drum sits ready, its skin stretched taut and resonant. The musicians exchange looks of satisfaction as their sounds begin to blend. They tell you they will play once the feast begins, guiding the rhythm of the celebration. Servants begin placing trenchers on the tables. These are thick slices of stale bread, carved flat to serve as plates. A young girl carries a stack of them, wobbling slightly under the weight. She explains that the trenchers will soak up juices from the meats and stews, becoming soft and flavorful by the end of the meal. The idea of edible plates feels whimsical at first, but entirely practical in a world where nothing is wasted. According to some regional customs, leftover trenchers were later given to the poor or fed to animals, a gesture that blended necessity with generosity. The hall grows noisier as villagers enter, their faces bright with warmth. They carry baskets wrapped in cloth, revealing contents only once they reach the tables. One family brings a small cheese carefully preserved from late autumn. Another offers a jug of ale brewed with dark malt. A woman unwraps a pie filled with venison and dried herbs. The moment each basket opens feels like a quiet unveiling, each family contributing their pride to the feast. A loud cheer echoes from the doorway as the lord of the manor enters, dressed in warm layers trimmed with fur. He moves toward the high table with steady steps, bowing his head slightly in greeting to the villagers. The elder who stands closest bows in return, a gesture that reflects both respect and mutual gratitude. The lord raises his hands in welcome, offering a few words of blessing for the day. He speaks of endurance through winter, of community, and of shared hope. You sense the atmosphere brighten even more. Conversations flutter like small birds between tables. Children laugh as they wait for the dishes to be served. Adults exchange warm smiles and enthusiastic greetings. You take a seat among them, feeling the warmth of the hearth at your back. The first dishes begin to circulate. Long platters carved with roasted meat pass from hand to hand. Bowls of thick broth and stewed vegetables move in steady rhythm down the tables. Loaves of bread, pies stuffed with savoury fillings, and trays of sweetened fruit appear in a steady procession. A servant pours ale into earthen cups. Steam rises from every bowl and platter, carrying aromas that wrap the hall in comfort. As you take your first bite of the meal, the flavours feel deeper for the cold outside. Each mouthful carries the weight of survival, the effort of many hands, and the joy of celebration. Around you, voices rise steadily. Laughter bursts in warm pockets. People offer each other second portions. Children sneak extra bites when they think no one notices. Music begins to fill the hall. The lute's melody dances lightly above the chatter. The shawm adds bright, playful notes. The drum taps a steady rhythm that seems to echo the beating hearts of everyone present. The feast shifts subtly from eating to celebration, from necessity to delight. A man at your table begins telling a story about a feast many years earlier when a donkey wandered into the hall and refused to leave. The room erupts with laughter. Someone else begins recounting how one winter the ale fermented too strongly, leading to a night of unforgettable chaos. People exchange stories with the gentle exaggeration that comes naturally in festive gatherings. The memories float between tables like warm currents. You lean back slightly, absorbing the warmth, the music, the scents, and the glow of candlelight. The feast feels endless in the best way, a moment when time relaxes its grip and winter loosens its hold. This is medieval Christmas at its most vibrant, its most communal, its most deeply human. Eventually, the laughter softens, plates empty, and cups grow still, but the warmth lingers, filling every corner of the hall. And soon, as the feast slows to a comfortable murmur, the merrymaking will begin. You ease back from the long table, your stomach warm with food and your cheeks tingling from the heat of the hearth. Around you, the hall hums with the soft contentment that follows a satisfying feast. Bowls are scraped clean, cups are drained, and the last few platters find their way back toward the kitchen. But no one rises to leave. Everyone knows the meal is only the first part of the celebration. The real liveliness begins now, in the curious mixture of games, mischief, and winter boldness that colours a medieval Christmas afternoon. A servant clears a space near the centre of the hall, pushing benches aside. Children gather immediately, curious and eager. An older man waves a long stick and calls for quiet. He announces the first game with a flourish, blindfold tag. Several children cheer. A young girl volunteers to be blindfolded, and the man ties a cloth gently around her eyes. She spins 3 times, then stumbles forward with arms outstretched while the other children scatter, their laughter bouncing off the walls in bright echoes. You watch as the girl gently bumps into a boy hiding behind a pillar. He shrieks with laughter and becomes the next seeker. The simple game fills the hall with warmth that even the fire cannot rival. According to descriptions preserved in winter recollections from various regions, playful contests like this were common during Christmas gatherings. They provided a welcome release from months of cold and work. Nearby, a group of men gather near the hearth where a circle of cleared space reveals the stone floor. One slaps another on the shoulder and challenges him to a wrestling match. They clear a wider circle as more villagers gather to watch. The first pair grapples with friendly intensity, their boots slipping slightly on the stone. A cheer rises when one manages to topple the other gently to the ground. The defeated man laughs heartily, brushing dust from his tunic, and demands a rematch. Wrestling contests like these appear frequently in medieval accounts of winter festivities, often described as displays of strength and good humour rather than real competition. At one end of the hall, teenagers invent mischief of their own. They steal a garland from the wall and create a makeshift crown, placing it on the head of an unsuspecting neighbour who has dozed off after the meal. When he wakes and realizes he has become the hall's evergreen king, he bursts into laughter. According to several folkloric notes collected from rural settlements, it was not unusual for someone to be declared the king of misrule for an afternoon, a light-hearted role that allowed playful teasing without offence. The musicians see the rising energy and gather again along the wall. The lute begins a cheerful tune, plucked in rapid, dancing notes. The shawm answers with bright, lively phrases, and the drum taps a quick, irresistible rhythm. The music seems to tug at feet, shoulders, and hands. People begin to sway, tap their toes, or spin in small dances. A pair of young women join hands and twirl in quick circles, skirts swishing as they laugh breathlessly. A few older men attempt the dance as well, though one quickly admits defeat and sits down, fanning himself dramatically to amuse the crowd. A man near you picks up a wooden cup and challenges his neighbour to a contest of riddles. He begins with a simple one, asking what grows tall yet is cut down in youth. The neighbour answers correctly, a candle. Laughter ripples through the group. The neighbour counters with a more complicated riddle, involving a creature with no legs that travels great distances. The man hesitates, rubbing his chin. A child pipes up with the correct answer. The wind. The hall erupts in applause. Riddle contests were beloved in many medieval households, not only as entertainment but also as a way to display cleverness and memory. Further down the hall, a group of women arrange a tossing game with dried apple slices. Each player tries to catch the slice in her mouth after another tosses it in the air. The game is harder than it looks. Apple pieces fall to the floor and the participants double over laughing. One woman finally succeeds and raises her arms triumphantly. She admits that her grandmother taught her the game years ago, though she never learned whether it began as tradition or simple play. A sudden commotion near the high table draws your attention. Several men gather with a large wooden board set between two benches. They place smooth stones on one end. One man tilts the board slightly so the stones roll toward the other end. The goal, apparently, is to land the stones within a chalk circle drawn hastily on the wood. The game resembles a tiny version of a curling match. The enthusiasts debate passionately about the correct angle to tilt the board. One man insists that the key is in the wrist. Another swears that certain stones roll straighter because of their shape. These debates echo similar arguments that appear in local accounts of winter pastimes. At the back of the hall, a servant walks among the crowd offering small cups of warmed cider. You accept one gratefully, feeling the heat spread slowly through your hands. The cider carries a hint of spice, mellow and comforting. A woman beside you explains that cider often replaced ale at winter festivities when grain stores were low. She smiles and adds that the drink eases the joints after dancing. She winks, hinting that she plans to return to the dance circle soon. A sudden shout from the wrestling circle pulls your attention again. Two of the stronger men have decided to test their skills. The crowd gathers closely. The wrestlers circle each other, each waiting for the other to make the first move. When they finally clash, their boots slide across the stone floor with heavy force. The match ends with both men toppling together in a heap and then bursting into laughter. The crowd applauds loudly. Near the hearth, a group of children gather around an elder who holds a carved wooden figure in one hand and a stick in the other. He demonstrates a game that involves flicking the stick to make the figure jump. The children squeal with delight each time the figure springs upward. The elder explains that he learned the game from his father. Whether it originated here or travelled from another region is unclear, but the joy it sparks is unmistakable. A woman approaches with a small basket filled with nuts.